he's best remembered as the author of Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted in Paris in 1948. He participated in the framing of it, and it represents his own convictions about religious liberty and liberty of conscience and background. The Lutheran Theological Seminary at Philadelphia truly framed and formed Fred's work and his understanding of mission and ministry in the world. And I wanted his name to be honored and remembered, as I believe it is, through the convocation and the seminar. One of the outstanding features of that work is sending young students, young seminarians, to the United Nations when it is in session in New York, to get an idea of what's going on with that agency, with which Fred worked for so many years. There's a lecture on alternate years, the years that young people are not going to the United Nations is a time when outstanding speakers who are qualified to speak about human rights and the way it's being played, that issue is played out in the United States and elsewhere around the world. And they come and they address the entire student body.
His contribution to the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was absolutely indispensable. And as we all know, that point has been made so effectively by John Mercer in his book called For All Peoples and Nations, The Ecumenical Church and Human Rights. He makes that point very definitively and unmistakably. And the key point there is that without the initiative of Fred Nolde and a few of his religiously interested cohorts, like Judge Joseph Proskauer, Jacob Blaustein, and some others, without those initiatives, it is decisively said by certain people who were there at the time that we would simply not have a Declaration of Human Rights. So what more do you need for a decisive contribution from Fred Nolde and the people with whom he worked so effectively? That was the very important overarching accomplishment. Part of that, and the second thing I would emphasize, is his contribution to what I call belief rights, by which I mean Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which guarantees universal freedom for the expression of and the carrying out of, within some limits, one's religious or conscientious beliefs. Fred Nolde, as far as Mercer can tell, was critical in formulating the language which finally came to occupy Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There was a lot of debate, a lot of back and forth. Fred's views were constantly solicited, apparently, and he was looked to by Eleanor Roosevelt and others for the final formulation of the language of that article. That is a huge accomplishment, it seems to me, because in my view, and I've become something of a student of religion and human rights and the importance of religious freedom in creating conditions of peace in the world, the formulation of that article was absolutely crucial in stating things the way they needed to be stated. And it's a very tricky issue, which we could go into. But in other words, to summarize, Fred Nolde did it right and made a huge contribution in laying the basis for the continuing concern and application of religious freedom as a human right. But it does seem to me that Fred Nolde, with his very distinctive traits of high energy, enormous intellectual gifts, memory, capacity to interact without notes on a whole array of areas and interests, these personal capacities of his, combined with the readiness of the culture to receive significant Protestant religious actors in the name of creating institutions, changing policies, and so on. That combination explains why Nolde was such an important figure during this time. The times have changed, and therefore the chances for someone like Fred Nolde to exercise the gifts that he had in such an effective way are different, it seems to me. But nevertheless, that combination, I think, explains in part the importance of Nolde. Many of the religious actors, Protestant and others, who were concerned about religious freedom in the post-World War II period were very concerned, at least the Christians were, with using religious freedom as a way to advance the Christian gospel. In the words of some of the actors, human rights and religious freedom could become a way to preach the gospel and convert the heathen. So that feature and that motivation for institutionalizing human rights and religious freedom was very much part of the picture. Fred came to see things very differently, and I think that grew out of his interactions with people from non-Christian religious backgrounds, secular people, public officials, others, who did not share his particular Christian outlook or the outlook of these more evangelically oriented people. His view came to be, and with him in this respect I entirely agree, you needed to find a common basis to which people could be accountable and to which they had access, regardless of whether they were Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, Jewish, atheist, or whatever their philosophical or religious persuasion might be. That's the whole idea of human rights. They're rights for human beings as human beings who come to the table not confessing one particular worldview, religious or not, but having certain common needs and interests as human beings. That is, protection against cruelty, against abusive treatment, against torture, arbitrary killing. Those common human interests are going to be, according to Fred and the proponents of the view of human rights that I also espouse, their view was we need to assert that common ground, which we all share. Then, at the second level, of course, once we guarantee for all people of whatever religious persuasion the assurances against mistreatment of that kind, we make allowance for their different conscientious religious persuasions. That's why you have Article 18, which leaves it up to the individual to make his or her own decisions about which God he will or will not worship, what his worldview may be or not be. That becomes critically an individual choice and guaranteed by states who are in compliance with human rights as a consequence. That's the whole idea that Fred was after. And I think in that respect he was prophetic, because it's taken a long time and still is in controversy for the world to get adjusted to that idea. We still have a lot of religious believers who don't like this secular foundation, et cetera, many controversies over that. But Fred, in my view, was exactly on track in respect to that idea. Well, I think at the heart of Fred's intuitions, in my view, admirable intuitions, was the idea, an idea I mentioned before here, that religion duly restrained in balance with a secular order, those are the conditions for world peace. That, I think, was a fundamental. He was a part, as you well know, of the just and durable peace commitment, and part of the recommendations of that committee, which lasted from 1942 to 1946, was that a regime of rights, respect for rights, religious freedom, etc., be part of a new world order, which the members of this committee were very much behind creating. And one of the things that's very interesting to a student like me of religion and peace, religion and human rights, is the degree to which even empirically, at this point, the insights of a Fred Nolde have come to pass. Let me mention specifically a book published last year by Brian Grimm and Finke, I've forgotten his first name. The subject of the book it's a survey of violations of religious freedom around the world and the connection of those violations to the instigation of conflict, and especially violent conflict. And the single most important conclusion of the book is the more abuse, the more violation, the more violence. That's the equation that comes out of a very rigorously conducted, methodologically, I think, extremely sound study of the connection between religious freedom and peace. So we begin to have empirical evidence now which confirm the kind of things that Fred Nolde was advancing. Together with that, there's a whole range of empirical data now which contribute to what's called the liberal peace. That's a term of trade in the academic community now. And the liberal peace basically means that the degree to which a country develops robust and carefully sequenced political and economic institutions, the higher the degree of peace, both internally and externally. In other words, democratic regimes do not fight against each other. That's become almost the most important political science axiom that exists in the literature these days. Not to say, by the way, that democratic regimes don't go to war with non-democratic, but that's another matter. The idea is that democratic institutions, including provisions for religious freedom and so forth, are a key feature of world peace. And that seems to me very much at the heart of what Fred Nolde and all of his associates were talking about during that period of the late 40s and right on through the 50s. So far from being irrelevant or beside the point or part of a dead past, those insights, the things that he was advocating, seem to me have gathered a great deal of momentum. And the time is ripe for us to, far from ignoring them, promoting them, expanding them, engaging in them with the same, I hope, kind of vitality that Fred Nolde did.